Welcome to SEPS2BIM for the AEC industry and architects. This is Onuma.com sponsoring this webinar. Last week we had the owner's perspective on the space and equipment planning system to BIM. This week will be about architects and engineers and consultants, the AEC industry. Next week we'll be focusing on data and vendors and equipment suppliers and how they tap into the system. So today's session is on architects, how we can tap directly into owners' data through the space and equipment planning system to build an ecosystem of data and BIM and other solutions from that, and the opportunities that this opens up. My name is Kimono Onuma of Onuma Inc. I'm the current chair of Thought Leadership Subcommittee of the Building Smart Alliance, past chair of Technology and Architectural Practice, creator of BIM Storms, and we also have Brian Sickles, project architect from Sherlock Smith & Adams, Inc. Brian, would you like to say hello? And we'll have you on later presenting. Do you have your audio on? Okay, maybe you're coming on later. We'll keep moving. So one more thing about Onuma Inc. We actually are architects as well, but we also have our own software called the Onuma system. We use a lot of other BIM applications as well. Brian will be showing how they have been working on projects using the SEPS2BIM process and the tools that they use. They're going to be showing Revit, Onuma system, and how they process the requirements into their projects. And we'll be showing a lot of different tools, and one of them is going to be Revit, which Brian is going to be showing, and the Onuma system. But we also have a segment toward the end where we'll be touching on some other applications as well. ArchiCAD, SketchUp, and other tools that are possible to link into the system. And the important point about this is not necessarily a presentation about a specific tool. It's about the overall process. And the goal that was met with a series of projects is to open up this owner's data to any application by making the data accessible, and that's has been the objective for many years now, and we're going to be showing you the results of that. The owner that's initiated this is the Department of Veterans Affairs and Defense Health Agency. Renee Tejan, a couple of weeks ago at the Health Facility Institute, presented what they have been doing as the Department of Veterans Affairs, working with the Department of Defense Health Agency to support the flow of data and requirements to the architects and planners and designers out there. And this is a monumental kind of an achievement, we believe, from an owner being able to make their data accessible directly to the industry, and this opens up a lot of opportunities for the industry. Just to give a little bit of background, this started years ago, actually in 2013, through a strategic plan that we, Onuma, were involved with through the National Institute of Building Sciences to look at the current state of the space and equipment planning system and the program requirements of these owners and how they can share their data more efficiently. And we are focusing on healthcare today, but you will see that this applies to any project type. It's not necessarily restricted to healthcare. It's not restricted to large projects. It can apply to at any scale. What's significant about the DoD and VA is that they had a shared system to manage information. For example, how do you define requirements for a department? And this is a common problem in the industry where we don't have consistent naming and numbering of spaces, for example, or departments. And this is actually a sketch just from a few years ago as we walked into a charrette of designers sitting around a table confirming, is this really Department 286, and is that what radiology is called, or is it something else? We can't do this from memory, and technology allows us to automate that and spend more time on design, and that's the opportunity for architects. As an architect, I believe that if we look at this from that perspective, there's huge opportunities to become more efficient and to provide better value back to the owners and our clients. So the finding, counting, and cleaning of information, where's the latest requirements, even if it's in an online form, a PDF document, or even if it's in a building information modeling template. So imagine a Revit template or a SketchUp template or an ArchiCAD template that says here's a typical room for an operating room, and park it on the web. The minute you park it on the web, if it's a static document, it's outdated if the requirements change, which they're constantly changing. Better ways of laying out an operating room, for example, or new equipment type And that is the opportunity that we see here with the SEPS2BIM process, is that these owners are moving away from static documents into dynamic data that's driven into building information models and other tools. So in the VA's and DHA's case, they have requirements about spaces and equipment, and they have a catalog of what they call these things. And that's the opportunity that we saw. Because this catalog existed, it's possible to actually manage and maintain that and communicate that efficiently to the designers out there. A typical stack of requirement documents can be daunting for even a small clinic. You have stacks and stacks of documents in PDF format or Excel files that say this is what goes into a dental exam room or an exam room, and here's the type of equipment we need in there, and here's the number of air changes we need in that room, and here's the functionality of that boom arm in the ceiling that needs electrical requirements. All of that information leads to millions of data points, especially in a larger project, that have to be consumed, and there are conflicts. If you go to static documents online and pull down a PDF, it's going to be outdated the minute it's saved as a document. So that now, with the SEPS2BIM process, what we worked on was to look at a way to make this accessible in a data format on the web, in a database format that moves away from static documents. So the space and equipment planning system is a tool that's used by DoD and VA to define requirements for a facility. So we're designing a new clinic. How many patients do we have? What type of procedures do we do? And it spits out a requirement of you need this many exam rooms and this type of equipment in the exam room. And it used to be shared as a static document, as a PDF output. It says here's a list of things that you need, and here's an Excel file that might have been used to say here's a list of things. And the architectural teams would need to consume that data as that was essentially the contract and put it into a project. And each project would be unique. Even if there was a default template, for example, for exam room, they might say in this exam room in this part of the country, we need an additional boom arm in the ceiling or another kind of monitor as part of the equipment. So it's not a static set of requirements. It's a constantly changing one on the default level of here's our typical requirements, and it's constantly changing for every single project as well. So DoD and VA, they looked at moving this to the system to the web. Not only moving it to the web, as part of the strategic plan, we recommended you move it to the web, and we also recommend opening up part of the system data even to the public. And by sharing it, here are our typical standards, then the designers, the architects out there can see what goes into an exam room and work with that. From an IT perspective, what was interesting, a decision was made. They already had the SEP system running online in one format, but they wanted to open up part of the data to themselves and to the public. They decided, and this is significant, that they needed a neutral IT environment to make that happen. And even internally, they decided that their internal IT infrastructure would be too complex to navigate and too long to develop to make what's called a web service and make it accessible on the web. So they decided to go to a government server called max.gov. This is shared services that you share information between government agencies and the public, or between government agencies securely. So you can either have information that's locked or open up information to the public. And a lot of agencies struggle with even sharing information internally within themselves. So by opening it up like this, it opened up the possibility of SEPS2BIM to be used by architects, by us. You'll see what I mean by that. So this is actually a catalog of the 2,000 pieces of equipment that is public on the web now. You can actually search and say what type of a boom arm is required and what are the characteristics of that boom arm. It's not a product-specific information, but it's the type of functionality that you need for a boom arm. And if you look on the left, there's an ID for each piece of equipment. Up until SEPS2BIM and the SEP strategic plan was initiated, this information was shared by CD. CD was burned and distributed by mail, which is very 1990s way of sharing information. But now on the web, by being able to search and find information, and it doesn't let you get to all the data. There's some secure data that you can't get to, but by making it web services on max.gov, this list of catalog of equipment is accessible. In that catalog and in the SEPS2BIM process, there are IDs. So now the output from SEPS is an Excel file with IDs that can be pulled into building information models. And that's a key thing that you'll hear later as well as we go through Brian's exercise. So it's a very simple kind of a base level of getting equipment and room data in order. The data already existed, just in the wrong format, in a static format. And as Renee Teagan said from VAs, owners have a lot of knowledge and data, it's just in the wrong format typically, which means it's hard to share it with the industry. But now with SEPS2BIM, you can actually go online, and we'll show you this in a little bit too, how you can actually log in and find what does a typical exam room look like, what type of equipment goes in there. And what Brian's going to be demonstrating, the next step was to actually go to a project-specific level. So when project contract requirements come out of SEPS and say, here's the list of spaces and equipment that we need, rather than going through tens of thousands of pieces of data, or millions in some cases for a larger hospital, and manually putting them into BIM, into Revit, into ArchiCAD, into SketchUp, whatever tool you're using, now with the SEPS2BIM process, what used to take days or weeks can happen in seconds or minutes. So the relationship between equipment, spaces, the departments, and what goes inside a building is essentially the starting point, the contract point that says this is what we require in a project. And it's a stack like Legos that says here's the infrastructure, and the SEPS2BIM process is that infrastructure that allows SEPS to use it internally as a government tool, and to also externalize that data and allow other vendors and consultants to tap into it. We're going to show some of that today with SketchUp, Revit, ArchiCAD, and the Onuma system. And next week we'll be talking about Atania and TriWG and BIM objects and 3D warehouse and how they've tapped into it as well too. So let's go into a little live demonstration to start with the simple parts of this of how do I look and find what are the typical requirements for a project, I mean for a space and equipment, or for a department before we get to the actual project level. And let's switch over to a short live demo of that. You can actually go online yourself and try this later. This is completely public, what I'm showing right here. It's called SEPS2BIM.org, and it has information about the whole project and links at the bottom to tools and other data and live links to that database that I showed earlier that's coming from max.gov, the catalog of equipment. So if the catalog of equipment changes, we as the public, on the public side as architects, we can see that catalog immediately and see what's possible, what's been changed. Let's just start simple here. Let's go to the space and equipment level here. So there are lists of typical spaces. These are the VA standards, and they're all down here, little icons. Or you can search and say, for example, if you want to find a dental exam. I spelled it wrong. There we go. So these are the dental spaces related to dental. And just like an Amazon shopping cart, I can say, well, I'd like to have one of these labs, and then maybe a DNTG1 dental treatment exam room. You notice that it gives information down here, and there's a shopping cart. You go to the shopping cart, and they're listed here. You can actually change the quantities. You can add more, so we could say, let's add a classroom space maybe, or an office. Let's look for an office space. So there's some offices. Let's add this office right here and go back to the cart, and we see 2 rooms listed here, and the total square footage and the total number of equipment. And if I change the rooms, you'll see the square footage changing. So this is actually linking directly into the VA, DoD, the max.gov database of equipment, and I can basically build a BIM from this. This is not a project yet. This is just what are your typical requirements for that. And if the requirements had changed a little while earlier, we would actually see that update from them. So we would actually build from that, and I'm getting a little bit of a lag here. There we go. Okay. And you'll see the results of this later. We're going to jump into how that works after Brian's presentation. Brian is going to show how they're actually using this on a project, at a project level. We have some introductory slides from Sherlock Smith and Adams. And Brian, is your audio on? Are you ready to speak, to do an introduction?
Yeah, I'm here. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Thanks for joining
Good
us.
deal. Yeah. Well, thank you, Kimon, for having me on. My name is Brian Sickles. I'm the BIM manager and the project architect of Sherlock Smith and Adams. I've got 3 parts to my presentation today. The meat of it is a live demo at the end. But to start out, say a couple words about who we are and what we do, and also why we began using the SEPS2BIM and the Onuma system. So as for who we are and what we do, we are a full-service healthcare design firm. Most of our work is for the Department of Defense. Specifically, we do clinics, labs, and hospital design for the Department of Defense. As a full-service firm, we have architects, interior, structural, civil, MEP, and we have a separate department for medical planning. And our medical planning department has medical planners, equipment procurers. We even have a former nurse and hospital administrator on staff. And so those medical planners are the ones that introduced me to the SEPS2BIM Onuma system following attending the 2016 HFI conference. So let's talk about why we started using it. Well, like Kimon said when he showed the 1691 library of equipment, I noticed that it had a nice little column for date modified, and the A0900 piece of equipment was modified last in 2014. And we built an equipment library, a static equipment library for in-house use in 2011. So anytime any changes were made, we were manually going into that equipment library and making updates to equipment-specific parameters. So what Onuma offered us, the SEPS2BIM Onuma system, was a dynamic equipment library that pulled directly from the latest SEPS data. And so that was a really big perk. We had a library of standard room templates, and nowhere near as comprehensive as what comes with this system. And his worked better, his were more comprehensive, and it was all automated. So potential for huge time savings. So the how we use it is the meat of the presentation, or my portion of the presentation today. And just for those who don't know how a design progresses, or wants a refresher, we have a little slide that shows design between 5 and 35%. So here we go at 5%. We have met with a client. We took with us to our charrette 3 potential footprints and apartment layouts. We review those with the owner and the end users, and we work through them over a couple days, and we return to the office with a site, a building footprint, and general department adjacencies worked out. So by 20%, we are supposed to have those departments actually broken into rooms. Include all the rooms that were in the PFD in this. We take that back at our 20% review. They make comments. They shift rooms around on us. We get the rooms within the departments, that level of the project settled. Then at the 35% design, what we show the client is all the equipment within the rooms. And then they review their equipment layout. They say, oh, actually, we want 2 people in this office, and we want extra monitors, or we need a printer, or different exam room requirements. So they go in through and they review our equipment, and we make those changes after our 35% review conference. So, okay, let's, I guess, move on to the recording we made of the pass-through.
Right. Thanks, Brian. So what you're going to be seeing next is the actual process of how you received from SEPS the program requirements as a requirement for that specific project, and then passing it through the SEPS2BIM to get it ultimately into Revit so you can complete the design. And just for those online, we are actually going to be, Brian's actually on the road, so we actually recorded a short clip, a series of clips with each of these steps. It's going to play as a video. If you have your computer audio on, make sure that you can hear the computer audio. We have captions along the bottom in case the audio is not clear enough for you. And we will be posting each one on the web. You'll get links to it as well later. They're just about 3-minute clips each, and we'll have a discussion after each clip to explain what you just saw. So we're going to play the first clip now, and you'll hear audio from the clip, Brian talking about the process.
The bulk of my presentation today will be on how we're using the system. And so let's get started. We're all with our Department of Defense projects. Let me show you what 5% to 35% design looks like. At 5%, we have departments based on the gross area. We have them put on a site within a footprint. We have our adjacencies between departments figured out. By 20%, we're supposed to have that block plan actually worked out with properly sized rooms from the PFD. And then by 35%, all the equipment has to be located within those rooms. So let me show you our step one. Coming to Revit here again. This is what our design team comes back from the charrette, having finalized this department layout. Looks something like this. They've got it color coordinated for me. And they come back also with an Excel file that y'all are familiar with. Looks like this, an export from SEPS. So what we do when they come back with these two items for me, I hop on to the Onuma BIM website, log in. This is typically what Katie does, actually. She's our medical planner, and she takes it from here. Once she's logged in, we hop into the sandbox. We go and we add a scheme from the SEPS requirement file, which is that Excel file I showed you we got with the job. We find that Excel file. We load it in here. We use this as a pass-through. We have to draw the area of a building, set the template, dollars, metric, imperial, give it a name, hit proceed, and the process is into something like this. We've got, you see this is the actual sandbox, building, and all these departments in there. We don't do a lot of work in the sandbox. Like I said, we use it as a pass-through. We hit export over here, and we export this as a BIM XML file for Revit. So from Katie, I get that XML file. We have our add-in installed here, and I import that XML file into Revit using this add-in. Import BIM XML. We set it up where we have the room separation lines instead of walls. We always want to add the components. I have to, on a 50,000 square foot clinic, I hit go before lunch and I walk away from my computer and let it churn.
So let's review what you just showed. You basically had the requirements from the owner as a SEPS output. What you used to do, how big was this project? I think you mentioned it, but...
That was about a 50,000 square foot clinic,
Yeah.
about just under 200 spaces in that project.
Okay, 200 spaces and thousands of pieces of equipment with attributes associated with it that came from SEPS. And
Right.
basically this was the one-time process that you imported was processing through that data and converting it into BIM, into Revit at that point. You're getting it from Onuma into Revit. So that actually gets a starting point for the next step, correct? Is that what we're going to see next?
I believe so.
Yeah. Could you speak at all about why this is efficient or good for you? Why does it help you, and why would it help the owner to be able to get this data like this?
Well, the owner has gone to great lengths to help the architects. They give us templates, and they want uniformity within their exam rooms, and all these tools they've given us. This is a one-to-one translation. Removes human error. It takes the owner's expectations, and it gives us all those components in the Revit file. If we had to do this, when we had to do this manually, take the PFD, make rooms, fill out the room information, then locate equipment. This was a lot of front-end work, which has now been condensed quite a bit.
Great. So it's not only a matter of speed, but a matter of accuracy, then, of getting all this data in a format that goes into BIM, and then you can focus on the design after that point.
Right. We spent a lot of time trying to get it right, back-checking. If we accidentally left out exam room number 13, we only designed our department around 12, and we catch that later and have to go back and redesign the building and shoehorn another space in, or two spaces. That cost us a lot of time and frustration. So the accurate translation of the owner's expectations and requirements into BIM with zero human error is extremely valuable.
Great. Okay, so one instruction to the people that are online, we actually are going to be taking questions if you want to type them into the GoToWebinar interface there. Young from my team is actually online monitoring the questions. If you have any questions about how to get things working on the GoTo, he's there as well too. So let's go and play the next video.
When this process is complete, let me open my 3D view. I have this. The system has created every department as an independent room level, or a department level. You see over here in my project browser. And I go to radiology. Zoom extents. There we go. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms in radiology as part of the department here. That's going to go right here on level 1. So what we have to do is we have to group these rooms so we don't leave anything behind. This last one I have not grouped. Let me create group. Okay. So the reason we group these is when we work with the equipment turned on, it really bogs down my machine. I get the spinning wheel a lot. It's a pain. So after I've grouped all these rooms, let me go the other way to fix my visibility settings. I hide the specialty equipment. That way I can move this. It brings the equipment with it, but it doesn't slow down my machine. And so I selected this entire department and I cut it and I paste it down at the appropriate level. Let's see. There they are. Okay. Another thing I've done is I use the color fill legend. I set it to a scheme to look at room parameters, specifically the department parameter, and I make the colors match what they brought back from the charrette. They're the AutoCAD import I have. So let me again turn off specialty equipment so it doesn't bog me down. I'll repeat this step for every department. I'm going to cut and paste logistics onto level 1. And so the last time my medical planner and architect saw this job, they had a CAD file and an Excel file. And me, SEPS2BIM, and the Onuma system churn on it for a little bit, and we give them a Revit file with 2 room levels set up and all the departments floating out here. They simply have to drag and drop those around, figure out the adjacencies, get all that worked out, and add walls and doors. So their job just was sped up immensely from the way we used to do it. Just wonderful power of automation. Got rid of all the errors. We're rotating these rooms, doing whatever we need to. Equipment's still in there. It rotated and moved with the rooms since I grouped it. Let me show you what this thing looked like after. Okay. So after they had everything situated, turned the equipment back on, got it moved around, we have a radiology department that looks like this.
I think you answered them with your last screen. The initial import does not include circulation in other spaces. They're just the net areas, and this is John asking this. What about the gross square footage? How do you block and stack adjacencies and account for areas in the first import? Can you explain a little bit about what you're getting from that initial requirement data as far as other spaces, net gross spaces?
Yeah, the PDF has the gross area, which accounts for our circulation. Sorry, I said PDF, PFD. And so our medical planners have sort of accounted for the gross area in their big department colored block, and so that represents circulation and rooms. And we do not. This program doesn't help us locate circulation. Doesn't replace the medical planning expertise we need. But we've accounted for that circulation within our departments that we bring back from the charrette.
Great. So the final screen that was shown where you actually had it resolved, obviously your designers and you went in there and resolved the design. You actually are using the requirements that came out into Revit initially, and you've done the layout and you present that back to the client. So right. There was a question that came in actually about that, I believe. Oscar is asking, are these rooms created in a separate level of the building when you do the first import? I think you talked about it a little bit there, but explain how they're coming in.
They do come in. Each department comes in as a floor, and so just to keep them separate. So after I've cut and paste off the floor that's named radiology, paste it onto the level 1 that I created, then I can delete that that level that the add-in created called radiology. And so
right.
I clean up those extra floors at the end.
Right. Okay. Question from Jay. How much does DoD allow you to customize the rooms. And I guess this is more a clarification. What the initial import that shows the rooms and equipment is the recommended or the contract requirement of what is assumed is needed. But you're, as a designer, if you see an exam room, for example, and the client saying you want to change things, can you change those?
They have their square footage requirement. They have their guide plate for how the room should be laid out. If it just works out better that we can make the room 6 inches more narrow and stretch it a little bit here and there to make it work, they typically have the 10% rule, where if you're going to make the room larger or smaller than the program for design, if it's greater than 10%, that's a no-no. And some rooms you have to be right on, and don't have any room for deviation. You have to give them exactly what they show you in the guide plate.
Right. Okay, that's good. So you're essentially using that and adjusting it, and then checking against the percentage differential between the original requirement to the edits that have to happen, obviously, as design progresses and you get into more specific layouts.
Right.
I think this
we have the freedom to squish and reshape things. We try to keep it as close as we can to what they're used to seeing. They like uniformity across all their facilities. Right.
Yeah. And I think you described in another call we had that even if this equipment was stacked in the corner of the room, you would have, well, I need 30 pieces of equipment in this exam room, then you would still move them in position anyway. You're still doing the design. In other words, the templates don't dictate the design. They're just giving you a starting point. You have complete freedom to change. That's an important point,
right.
I think, because we're getting questions like that about how locked are we into the templates.
We've got a lot of freedom to tweak, and those are starting points. Right. Yeah, it's an added bonus that the system locates the equipment like the templates. We would be just as happy if the system dumped every piece of equipment in the corner and let us move it where we wanted it.
Right. Okay, great. So we have actually 2 more videos. We're not going to play them fully. We're going to point everybody who's logged in to the videos online. They're short videos. I might scrub through a few of them and we could talk about them. Brian, this last one we were going to show is number 4.
Okay.
This was an interesting point you made about the relationship between the DoD's minimum modeling requirements, minimum BIM requirements, and the data inside those minimum requirements. And can you describe this a little bit, what we had in the video? Maybe we just leave it at that for the video itself.
Yeah, usually that slide up. The DoD's minimum BIM requirements actually give you this table 20-1, and they expect that the information be named and the parameters be named a certain way. Unfortunately, this does not match the SEPS output. So what we get out of SEPS and have it loaded into our model, then we have to go in and copy information from one parameter name to the other, or rename the parameter. And one of these days we have hopes that everyone will get on the same page of what they want their parameters named, but we can easily adapt to what the DoD wants, modifying what we get straight out of SEPS.
Right. And that's actually an important point. Essentially, what you're asking here is that because we're seeing the DoD's PDF requirements on screen here, and SEPS is a constant update in the database, inconsistencies between the two can happen. And really the message here is it'd be great if these things were in sync. And as I described early in the introduction, a lot of these static documents start to be problematic, especially as the years go by and they get out of sync. And the technologies that we're all used to using on the web, we expect things to be in sync. So this is an opportunity. It's not 100% perfect, but like you mentioned, there's a lot of benefit because you're essentially doing things in a much shorter time to get a starting point, and you're starting to notice inconsistencies like this that would be actually valuable to point the client back to and say it'd be great in the next project to adjust and fix things that might not be consistent in the rules or the instructions that we're getting from
right.
them.
We actually put all of the SEPS data for all the Appendix B information that we get, ceiling heights, finishes. We put that in our rooms, copied straight from Excel into our room families, and so that parameter is filled out. And then our engineers like it because they know the air change rates. They know they can use filters and highlight a piece of equipment that has puts off so many BTUs, or electrical engineers can check a room parameter and see what the lighting level requirements is from Appendix B. And when in doing this, we found that there had been some human error in transferring Appendix B into SEPS, and so we have actually sent that back up the chain, and are hoping that they can make that a little more accurate for us.
Right. And as you mentioned, this was 190 or close to 190 spaces with over 3,000 pieces of equipment. We calculated, typically out of SEPS for a clinic this size, there's tens of thousands of data points because each piece of equipment has attributes associated with it. And having that there, you talked about in another video about how you can actually use that to filter and find equipment that needs electrical for your engineers, for example, right? Because the attributes are coming through as you're doing the design. So the contrast is doing this automatically over lunch or reading through tens of thousands of data points and manually collecting the objects and placing them in the model versus automating that part of the process and spending more time on value-added effort. So we're getting a few more questions. There's actually a lot of questions. I'm not sure if we're going to get through all of them, but a thrust of some of them are about can we connect other systems to this? And that's going to be more of next week's presentation about what can we do with the data. This data, we're just showing the flow from owner's database live into a project like this, but same data going into equipment or into vendors or into commissioning or into facility management. It's the same workflow. So I'm going to kind of change tracks for a little bit. We actually got an ArchiCAD question. I was planning on showing ArchiCAD in SketchUp. But let's go back to where I left off earlier. This takes about a minute to produce here when we said that shopping cart I showed. It sends back a link, and I got this link where it actually has the 3 rooms that I asked for in the shopping cart. These are the generic requirements before they were actually created into a project, but what VA or DHA thinks they need in an exam room. As soon as we get this on screen, there's a button on the left side that lets you take it out into Revit, ArchiCAD, SketchUp, and even COBie. This is an important point, is because this data is structured from the beginning, this is already set up to be delivered for facility management. We're obviously at the very beginning of a project, but it already has a proper COBie structure. In other words, it's available to be used. So let's export a SketchUp version of this. I just downloaded it, and let's take a look at that for a second. The point is that what we saw with the Revit effort right here, there's the just now downloaded. It's an XML file, 187K. And if I open up, before I go to SketchUp, actually, let's show one thing, because this question came up. Where do we get all these plugins? If you go to the SEPS2BIM.org website, all the SketchUp plugins, the Revit plugins, the ArchiCAD plugins, the creation of the spaces, there's actually even a free version of getting into the Onuma system to build a project from it, and the APIs are there. So for example, down at the bottom here, we can see SketchUp objects here. There's a whole library of objects that Trimble SketchUp converted from Revit into SketchUp format that match, the 2,000 objects match the IDs that are in Revit. So if you want to do the same thing in SketchUp, you can download the objects. Or the more interesting thing is what I just did with that room. So for example, in SketchUp, I can go in, and let's start up SketchUp here from blank scratch here. There's a plugin, an open source plugin that was developed jointly by Trimble and Onuma. And what this is going to do, this is a blank SketchUp file. If I have the free plugin installed, and I go File, Import, I'm going to go grab that XML file that I just downloaded to the desktop here, the 187K for the 3 rooms. And what this is doing is this is going to the 3D warehouse, grabbing the right SketchUp object, placing it in the right location in the room, and bringing all the attributes from SEPS. So what started from the Max database earlier of the equipment data now is being merged into this model in SketchUp, and then the designer can do their work in SketchUp. If you open this up in Revit, just like Brian showed, it would be the same thing in Revit, essentially those same objects in Revit available to be used. So let's actually go and let's see if my machine can handle all these models being open here, but I'm going to open up ArchiCAD because we promised we're going to go back to Revit again later, but basically ArchiCAD. And this is an important point for our presentation, is we're not stuck to any single application. Each application has its pluses and minuses. Obviously there's a lot of Revit users out there, a lot of SketchUp users, so there's the complete model in SketchUp. And if I clicked on these objects, it would actually give us the JSN names and the attributes that came along with it, and I can continue the design in SketchUp. So this is ArchiCAD 20. We'll just spend a few minutes here. The strength of ArchiCAD is that it's actually very fast to import. So Brian, what you described for a lunchtime operation in ArchiCAD, it's a minute or less maybe, a couple minutes. The weakness is it still doesn't have all the attributes coming through. It's going to bring in the geometry, and it's actually a very simple thing that can be fixed if there's enough of a demand to do that. But I just want to show, just to make the point that we're actually bringing in the similar type of data that Brian imported, and we'll go into this, and I'll hit import. It's a free Onuma plugin in ArchiCAD, and it'll go and grab the department, and it's done. So that's an entire department. So if we had 5 departments like this, it might take a minute and a half or so. With the equipment, same IDs, and then the if we go into an axonometric view, you can see it's actually all in 3D as well. So this same plugin, same output from SEPS2BIM in ArchiCAD, SketchUp, Revit. And we have other vendors coming in as well with their tools. And that's kind of one of the main points of this presentation, is that it's not a single application. It's really open because these owners have opened up their data in a way that allows you to go into Revit, like we showed, or go into the shopping cart from SEPS2BIM and build what's the typical requirements, or use it on an actual project. And as Brian showed, these projects that Sherlock Smith and Adams are doing, these are their projects now that are doing a lot of, maybe Brian, you can say a few words about this. What's next for this? Are you going to be using the SEPS2BIM process on other projects, or what's the status?
Yeah, this is the new normal for us. Anything that comes with a SEPS PFD is going through the SEPS2BIM Onuma process from now on. We have discussed and are looking for the next opportunity to use your shopping cart tool and sit down with some of our private sector clients. We have one we're hoping to get to do this with in South Alabama, and use that shopping cart to help them develop their program, how much square footage they really need for offices, exams, and whatnot. So yeah, we're excited. It's been a great product for us.
Great,
and lots of untapped potential still.
Yeah, there's a lot more. We're just scratching the surface, and getting input from the AEC industry is actually going to help these owners to refine. This is really a baby step in many ways. This is just the beginning of data going into a project, but it's a huge step because it has impact all the way through, and getting that data right, correct, and not having to rekey it is a huge benefit. And as we showed, by opening it up, that was part of the strategic plan. If you, as we told VA and DHA, is that if you open up your data to the industry and you're consistent about how you put your data out there, vendors are going to come in and consultants are going to come in and want to link into your data and give value back to you. So immediately, as soon as this was opened up, we had, like we showed, ArchiCAD, SketchUp, Revit was already there. It was refined to Tania, BIM Object, which we'll show next week as well. TriWG would be next week, and 3D Warehouse, all aligned with that data. Once we get in alignment, we're all talking the same language, and we're using the same rules, and we're delivering data back in a format that is accessible to the owners. So next week is going to be equipment vendors, but as we sign off here in the last few minutes, we'll take questions again a little bit more too. But there were a few questions about, does this apply only to healthcare? We showed healthcare. There's another website called Program to BIM. Essentially, it's using the same data in a neutral format. So this is actually the exact same shopping cart functionality where I can go and say I want a dental room and say I want to pull these dental rooms into a shopping cart and build a BIM from that. This is all free online. You can actually try it out. There are also office templates and educational templates. These are generic neutral templates, the beginnings of it. And next week we'll show how some vendors are actually tapping into this as well too. So you can try this on your own at programtobim.com. And let's see, let's take a few questions here as we wrap up. Chris is saying, is SEPS dedicated to VA projects, or can this be utilized for Corps of Engineers projects with similar requirements? Definitely. The data is in the background. The data is driving the models. So if the data changes, just like I showed, we use the same background to create a neutral healthcare requirements or educational facilities, you can really adjust it to drive the models. So instead of manually putting data into models, we're taking data. It could come from an Excel file, but in this case, SEPS actually has a database, so we're feeding it in, but you could start with an Excel file. So it has immense potential. By keeping this data in a lightweight format like this, you're able to push it into many formats, including non-BIM formats, room data sheets, things like that. Let's see. Russ is saying the key is that the program follows medical, clinical, functional needs, so adaptation is possible on a project-by-project basis where warranted to meet the project-specific functional requirements. Russ Manning from used to be with DHA actually is online. He's giving us a comment about that. Yeah, so it can apply to other owner types, and it's basically getting the program to feed into the models as the design progresses. So coming up, we've had a lot of webinars, and for those of you that have signed up for today's webinar, you will be getting an email with links back to the today's recording, as well as the videos that we did not show. We have 2 or 3 other videos that were recorded in the preparation for this. If you go to bim.edu.weebly, you can actually see the latest webinars coming up. There's a coming up button, and you can link to the completed ones. We're sharing some of them publicly, and other ones are for those that have signed up. You will get the link to today's webinar. And we have our webinar next week. I encourage you to join the vendor webinar. It's titled Vendors, but it's really about data. A lot of the questions that were coming in today about data and moving it and linking it to other systems, that's what this is all about. Once you have it on the web, and you have it connected, and you have it secured, and you know who's accessing it, and what you want to share or not share, the owners, VA and DHA in this case, they had a very specific subset of data that they decided should be public because it's already publicly on the web as far as what are typical requirements for a dental exam room. When it gets into an actual, we're working on a project now, it's a whole different scenario. But the vendors now, what's exciting about this is other vendors and like the Tanias and the TriWGs are linking and aligning with this data because the owners have declared here's the structure of our data so we can build up on top of that. Few last questions here. We're still getting questions in here. Does SEPS capture electrical sockets, light switches, and sink drain set taps, for example? It has a few light switches and things like that, but it's not. The intent is not to completely engineer the room, but to give the intent of what type of functionality we need in the room. In fact, the spaces in DHA's case have attributes associated with it, for example, floor finish and air changes, and then the engineer still has to resolve that. So it's not going to automate your design effort or your engineering decisions, but it is definitely going to get you closer to the finish line and be in alignment with what the owners are asking you to build and design to, and it's a way to validate as the design progresses. That's one thing we did not show today, but Brian alluded to it, is that you can then, as you're working on the design, and do a delta check and say, okay, what was the original requirement for this exam room? Was 120 square feet. Now in my Revit model, I have 123 square feet. Is that okay or not? Obviously, it's going to shift a little bit, and that variation depends on the owner's tolerance of how much they want a delta, but you're able to, once you have data in place like that in BIM and in a database like this, you can start doing a lot of crunching and analysis of the data and reports. And also having the data outside of the model allows a lot of other non-BIM users to interact with it. So the COBE export that I talked about earlier, you don't have to have a BIM to start interacting with the model. You're seeing room data that you can start making decisions on. So with that, let's go to the end of the show here. And thank you very much, Brian, from Sherlock Smith and Adams for presenting, and most importantly for sharing what you did. We were kind of blown away when we met you first at the HFI conference last year, and then this year when we went there and we talked to you, we realized that you were actually doing quite a bit with this. And we asked you if you'd be willing to present and share. And we want to really thank you for being a leader, for Sherlock Smith and Adams really being a leader in the use of this, and especially in sharing how they're doing it to bring a huge benefit back to the owners and the clients that you're working with. And we hope to continue on with, like we said, we're just scratching the surface here. This is just the very beginning, and we encourage others to share and join and show us what they're doing with their process, and join us next week. Brian, would you like to say anything as we sign off? I
think we're good. You've been a huge help to us in understanding the process and adapting to it, and it's helped us be more accurate, more efficient, and we're happy to help.
Great. Thank you very much. And we have this session recorded. It'll be online. See you next week. If you log into bimedu.weebly, you'll actually get an access to next week's webinar as well. And actually, another side note, we have another webinar tomorrow with the Asset Leadership Network, talking about data and assets relating to all of this. So it all connects in many different ways. Thank you very much. Signing off, this is Kimon Onuma from Onuma Inc. Thank you for joining us today.